I've just now met you two here on the side. My name is Elena Johnson. I'm Vice President of Lending here for the credit union. Been here for just over 7 years now, March of '05. Some of my history, I guess, when we talk about these different topics listed up here, I spent just about 5 years in the dealership world, anywhere from sales to finance, and pretty much everything in between. So I've got some good insight on how some of this process works. We're not going to get super detailed about a lot of this stuff, but we're going to do a brief overview of the auto lending process, kind of tailoring that towards a first-time buyer, maybe somebody who isn't quite sure of exactly what the process is going to be or not. Buying versus leasing, try to solve some of those mysteries on what is leasing, what does it mean to me, things like that. And then student lending, we're going to talk just very briefly about what student lending, how student lending affects the credit union, and what other opportunities that we may have, things like that. Okay? All right. Test my PowerPoint skills. So what we're going to cover on these things is the process, or specifically the auto lending side of it. The process, different things to consider, going through the purchasing process after the purchase, and then again the buying versus leasing, what does it mean to me, and then the student lending. So just a quick synopsis of everything. Okay, so you're ready, you've got the new vehicle itch, you're thinking that you're ready to buy something different. Like I'm saying up here, it's probably best to start off thinking about what is my budget, what kind of payment can I afford. It isn't just specifically about the vehicle, right? You've got to have full coverage auto insurance, make sure everything is set up there, and then kind of compare that to your budget. One of the good rule of thumbs that I learned many years ago is this statement here. If you talk about a 5-year loan, typically per $1,000 it'll add roughly $20 to that monthly payment. Okay? So to give an example of that, $10,000 borrowed over 5 years would equal about a $200 a month payment. That's using kind of a middle of the road interest rate type thing. Something that we require on our side of it, obviously, is full coverage auto insurance. Anything with liability would need to be something specifically waived by one of us lenders here at the credit union, as well as, if the loan was a personal loan or something like that, insurance would not apply. But full coverage insurance would need to be in place, and you have to know what that's going to cost you. Some people have, things in their driving record that may influence what the premium's going to be on something like this. So it's very important to have some of that hammered out. Also, the vehicle plays into that as well. If you're wanting to buy a Corvette convertible and you've got, 10 accidents on your record, your premium might be kind of high. So you want to make sure that you know what can I put in there when I think about that budget process. Okay. So you're still thinking about that purchase. What do you do first? Think about the budget, get something penciled out for yourself. Come in and talk to one of us. We've got lenders at all of our locations. Come in and get pre-approved. It's a lot easier to go into the process of shopping as well as all those different things by knowing what types of terms and conditions you qualify for. Okay, if I want to buy a 2005 vehicle, what type of term might I qualify for? Or what might be available, right? It's beneficial to know that because the shorter the term, the higher your payment's going to be. Okay? Why else do you suppose it'd be nice to have some sort of pre-approval in place prior to stepping into that dealership or somewhere else shopping for the vehicle? Anybody want to take a stab?
Makes buying a car a lot easier.
Yes, it does.
Takes the stress out of it.
That way you're pre-approved here and you don't get fleeced by some auto loan in-house financing.
True, yeah. It gives you some negotiating power. If you know what you're there for, I can be approved up to $25,000. You know you've got some negotiating power on the dealership side of it. The other thing that's beneficial there is you might have already done some research regarding the vehicles, right? So in a pre-approval, we might have already said, okay, I'm looking at this type of vehicle. We can kind of see that the average value of those ranges from this to this. So you might have some of that information already, which will again help you in that negotiating. One thing I might mention as well on the pre-approval side of it, you don't necessarily need to come in to one of the branches. There's other alternatives to do the application. You can certainly apply online. right? Give us a call, get to one of the lenders, we can start the process over the phone. It's very simple. And then of course, if you'd like to come in and see one of us, we'd love to see us, come on in. But there are other options other than coming right in. We know that the work days get kind of busy and whatnot. We're only here from 8 until 5, so it gets kind of tough to get in the door. So those other avenues are very nice as well. So if you're like me, shopping for the vehicle is the funnest part. Knowing, okay, what avenues am I going to take here, going through this process of finding that vehicle that's right for me. So other than hitting the dealerships, going from store to store to store, what other avenues are out there? How else can you shop for a vehicle without even leaving your house? The internet, right? There's a huge amount of places online that can give you access to all the different inventories of the local dealerships, as well as private party sales as well. So if I personally am trying to sell my vehicle and I post it on, say, cars.com or carsforsale.com, you, as the other consumer, can sit in your house and see that as well. One of the things that might end up happening to you if you come into a local dealership or even a non-local dealership and you want to start test driving vehicles, what are they going to ask you for? Have a valid driver's license. They got to make sure you're legal before they're going to let you hop into that vehicle and go out on a spin. As well, you know, the other thing they might ask you for is insurance. Do you have insurance right now? If an accident happens, your insurance covers it and not ours as a dealership. That's sometimes even a document that would be there that you'd have to sign to say that you are acknowledging that as you drive off the lot. Okay? Any questions so far on any of that stuff? Have you all used the Kellowan Auto Mall website at all? That's probably one of the most popular local sites. It's right on Kello's. It's right on the left-hand side of Kello's homepage. It's a great resource. They've got a lot of different dealers. They go through new, used, private party, any other type of recreational vehicle and whatnot that you would try, someone would try to be selling as well. So it's a pretty good resource, and it's on the local level, so that's nice.
Have you had any experience with people buying from like eBay or some of those online sites?
Yeah, we have. In the past, just on the credit union side of it, we have had quite a few members that have purchased vehicles from some individual on eBay or Craigslist or something like that. One of the things that gets a little scary about some of that is fraud, obviously. I actually have a personal friend of mine that had that happen to him with a motorcycle they purchased on eBay. Somebody had created a whole new web page, mimicked it just like eBay, went through all the different parameters, wired his $8,300 or whatever it was, and it turned out to be fake. Person was in California sitting in their basement somewhere probably and just took $8,300 from this guy. He's never going to get it back. And he's got no bike to show for it. So there's so many things out there that can get pretty vicious when it comes to the fraud standpoint. The things that we're going to ask you, if you would choose to buy a vehicle from eBay or Craigslist, something like that, is a copy of the title, front and back, so that we can see some of that. We might ask you to try to contact eBay, something like that, so you can verify, is this person actually a seller on eBay? Are they legit in that aspect of it? So there's a few different things we'll ask about there. On the credit union side of it, we have actually had a member almost get to that point until the loan processor was quick enough to catch that there was a little blurb on there that just wasn't right. And they ended up making some phone calls, and it turns out it was not a good thing. So it's not always what we think it is. Not everything is truthful on the internet. But good question. Okay, so what happens now? After all that shopping, you found the vehicle. What do we do? More than likely, the dealership's going to give you a selling price, right? So one way or the other, they're either going to put it on paper, purchase agreement, something like that. That's really just going to be the amount they're willing to part with that vehicle. So selling price equals the amount they're willing to sell it to you for. How can it be verified? You know, we talked about some of the stuff with the Kellowan Auto Mall and whatnot, and some ways they can incorporate that, but some of the specifics would be an NADA site. Actually, the credit union uses NADA for our valuations on vehicles. Kelly Blue Book is another good one. Competitive pricing, right? It pays to shop. Remember that? It's a big thing. So that, in my experience, that's helped 100 times over. Is just doing your homework and shopping around a little bit, getting some of that information from other dealerships, individuals. MSRP, so the manufacturer's suggested retail price. If you're looking at a new vehicle, you might see that cool little window sticker that sits on the passenger side rear window, and it'll tell you, okay, here's all the options. This is what we say the MSRP should be, okay? Or what they think the vehicle should be sold for. Have you used an NADA site before, Kelly Blue Book, things like that?
I sold cars for quite a few years.
Oh, did you? Good. Oh, perfect. Where at?
I worked at Lithia for a year, and I worked at Bernardi for 3 years.
Oh, good for you.
So, and then I decided selling cars is not that much fun.
It is tough.
It's
very
hard.
tough. A lot of hours.
Well, yeah.
Well, what happens if you're trading something? So you go to the dealership, you find the vehicle, you're trading in something. Now, what they're going to do most of the time, not always, some dealerships do differ on this, is inspect your vehicle. In some cases, take the vehicle for a drive. That's maybe how they determine if, in fact, there is something wrong with the vehicle. They don't spend a lot of time on it, I guess, per se, more like a 15-minute walk around, quick little spin, whatever the case is going to be. They're going to value your trade-in. What are they going to use to do that? Do you think they're going to use the NADA site? Do you think they're going to use Kelly Blue Book?
They use whichever one suits them best.
Very true. They also have some other wholesale choices as well. Those are things that, as the general public, we don't necessarily see. Okay, those are things that provide them data. Okay, there's 100 different auction sites around the country. All these vehicles are running through it. This is kind of the average of what they're selling for. When you think wholesale, you can kind of think maybe a lesser amount. So I guess I like to kind of think that they look at all these things in some way, shape, or form and try to give you some number there. Of course, what they're going to do is say, well, what could they go out and buy that vehicle for if today they had to go to an auction and purchase that vehicle and not from you on the floor of their dealership. So more often than not, that's probably what they would come back to, is those different wholesale sources. Just because you're in a wholesale environment, why would you pay more for something that you can buy tomorrow at a cheaper price? It is good to still have those different values. Your NADA, your Kelly Blue Book, they are updated. It's not like they're behind the times by 2 months or anything. They do keep on top of them, some more than others, but they do keep those values pretty current, so they are good tools to use as well. So what they're going to do at that point is they're probably going to have a big piece of paper and come out and sit with you and say, all right, this is what we're willing to sell the vehicle for, this is what we're going to give you on trade, and guess what? This is what you're going to owe as the difference. Then you might get into those conversations about what you owe in your trade-in and things like that. Typically all those things are done on paper though, so that you have a trail that you can come back to, to say one way or the other what you're looking at doing. Any thoughts or questions on any of this stuff so far?
You're all so quiet.
All right, so what are you going to do? Are you going to buy this vehicle? Are you happy with the trade? What happens from here? So at this point, you've been given the information related to it, to the transaction. It's going to give you the price. If it's a new vehicle, what else are they going to tell you? The rebates, probably, any rebates that would apply to that new vehicle. And then, of course, your trade value and any other things that may apply. One thing that I guess I can't stress enough is to make sure that you have shopped, okay? There are some places that have built better names or worse names for the other dealerships, and those other dealerships kind of fall into it now, getting the same label on their back right away that everybody's terrible. I'm sure you'll agree with it. I'm here to tell you not every dealership is terrible. They're there to sell vehicles. We're here to buy vehicles, so why not make the process as fun as it can get? But just know that it does pay to shop for some of that, because like I said before, you can use some of that to your advantage, right? If you're shopping around, you know that, okay, last two dealers sold it for this price. This dealer is $2,000 more. What's wrong with this picture? Right? It's a fair assumption. So always make sure your research, have they showed me the research? Has the dealership done the research for me to say, okay, this is what we can tell you this vehicle is worth? And then have you exhausted all your other search options? It's definitely, you know, resourceful to use some of those online tools. They are up to date. You can kind of see actually on some of the websites like cars.com, it'll tell you specifically the last time that ad was updated, so you'll be able to know, is this current or is it not current? Okay. All right, so if you've agreed to all this stuff, you're probably going to be talked to about a few other things that you can agree to purchase or not purchase. Okay? So what are things that they might suggest? Well, we've got gap insurance, extended warranty coverage, credit life and disability products, so on and so forth. Does anybody know what the credit union offers for these different types of products? Do you guys know by chance?
Do you guys have all of those?
We do. Good job. We do. One of the things, and I won't get into great detail about it, but do you all know what gap insurance is? Have you? Okay. Okay. So for the good of the group, what is gap insurance? Gap insurance is a premium that you can buy. The credit union sells it for $369. Okay, that's the price for the entire term of the loan. So what gap insurance does is, let's say that I finance my vehicle for $20,000. Okay, 6 months, a year later, 2 years later, I go out and I get in an accident, and the insurance company says your vehicle is now a total loss. You call the credit union and you say, Elena, what do I owe on my vehicle? And I have to say, well, you owe $18,000. I'm just making up numbers. You owe $18,000. And you say, oh, gosh, the insurance company was only going to pay me $12,000. They said that was fair market value. What do? You have $6,000 sitting there that you either have to come up with to pay off the loan or find a way to roll that into a new vehicle purchase. That's not easy, okay? That's just not easy based on the price that dealers and other people are willing to sell their vehicle for. And you've got to have some equity there. So that gap insurance would kick in and would pay that deficiency balance for you. The really cool thing about what our gap insurance policy does is it also pays out $1,000 down payment assistance towards the purchase of a new vehicle. I have not found that in any other gap policy that I've seen come across my desk. That's huge. That almost pays for the premium 3 times over. We sell the premium is $369 today. So that's a big benefit. Kind of my rule of thumb that I've always rolled with is, if you're financing, you know, less than 70% of the vehicle's value, okay, you might be borderline. If you're any more than 70% loan to value, you need to have this coverage on there, because you're not, more than likely, your loan's going to be pulled out to here so you can have a decent payment, right? You don't want to pay huge amounts per month. So as that vehicle depreciates, you're not going to be paying enough down on that loan. You're not going to catch it. You're always going to have this sitting out there. So why not keep yourself covered enough to say, if something ever did happen, you know, I'd have that to kick in. Now that only pays the deficiency if, in fact, the vehicle is a total loss. If you just get in an accident, it doesn't do anything. Okay? Extended warranty coverage. The dealerships, as well as the credit union, we do have an extended warranty coverage plan that we do offer. It is through an A+ rated firm. They're a great company. They've done very well for us. We've actually been with this company most recently for a couple of years now, and they are by far the best that we've worked with. They have a plethora of coverage options available, you know, that can fit vehicles. Like, you can tick back a little bit in the model year as well as the miles. So different types of coverages that would apply with things like that would be like a basic powertrain coverage. What makes the vehicle go? That's what's that's what's covering it. Okay. A step up from there, covering a few more components, and all the way up to a kind of like a factory warranty type mimic, something like that. Okay. We can actually offer those to anybody at any point in time, so you don't necessarily need to be doing a loan for that. It would be something you could just say, well, my vehicle's bought out of coverage, it's paid off, you can come in and purchase it off the street as well. Credit life and disability coverage, you'll see this on the dealership side. You'll also see it on the credit union side. credit life insurance, should you pass unexpectedly, the life insurance would kick in and pay the balance of the loan. That's a big one when you talk about cosigners, right? So if me and my uncle are on a loan together, I know that if I had it on myself and something happened to me, he wouldn't be responsible for making the payment. He would take it off and it would satisfy the debt. Disability coverage, that's a biggie. Disability coverage kicks in obviously if you're hurt, if you're sick, injured, out of work, doctor says, hey, you can't go back to work for like 6 weeks or whatever the case is going to be. Disability insurance would kick in and it would pay your monthly payment to the credit union for you. That's a big one. That's a pretty minimal expense on our side of it, but it is definitely something to consider when you're doing that. So when you talk about payments and whatnot and you're trying to figure out a budget, keeping some of this extra coverage in mind is a good thing. Well, it somewhat gets noted as well, it's just one more thing to add to the loan. You know, there's a lot of benefits, there's a lot of feature benefit things that can go along with that that can help protect you in the future as well. Any questions on any of those different products and services that might come across the desk at you? All right, so you've made the final decision. What's going to happen? The dealership is going to get all the paperwork ready. Some examples of things you're going to sign: purchase agreement, odometer statement saying, I'm turning my vehicle over to you with X miles on it, you're turning yours over to me with this many miles on it. Okay? Any other damage disclosure type things, if the vehicle had a damage disclosure, you would be required to sign a documentation that is South Dakota law. Right? So don't let anyone ever try to pull that over on you. If it is damage disclosure and you're sitting on a dealership's lot, they have to make you sign a document that says you acknowledge that. Okay? And any other documents, warranty docs, all those things. So you sign everything, you get the loan docs taken care of. Really, we can do this kind of before or after you purchase the vehicle. Don't just go sign without letting us know you're going to do that, but just give us a call and say, you know, I was pre-approved, this is what I found, I'm going to go ahead and sign, then I'm going to come see you. We're completely fine with that. You don't need to come all the way back here necessarily. And every situation is a little different, but you wouldn't necessarily need to come back here, then go all the way back to the dealership to take possession of your vehicle. Okay? We can be pretty flexible on some of those things. The other big one is make sure that full coverage auto insurance is in place before you drive off the lot. I have seen this happen. Somebody drives off the lot with a new vehicle and crashes it out on 12th Street right outside the dealership. I've seen that happen and it's terrible. Now in most cases, if you've got full coverage insurance, it's going to kick over, right? You're going to have automatic coverage coming from a different vehicle, something like that. But just make sure you have that in place. You just hate to see anything bad happen when you leave that lot. Okay, so you've taken possession of that new vehicle. Now comes the fun part of paying the state for their sales tax, that collection. Okay, gets kind of confusing. We see this a lot with the titles and what happens before you get the title and things like that. So you've taken possession of the vehicle, and the dealership now has 30 days to provide you with the documentation you need to take to the treasurer's office. Okay? That's not something that the credit union needs here. That's what you need to take to the county treasurer's office to pay those pay the sales tax and licensing. So what does the state charge? The state charges 3% sales tax and the trade difference. Okay? So if I bought my vehicle for $20,000, my trade-in was valued at $10,000, I only pay it on the $10,000. Okay? One thing that maybe isn't terribly well known, or at least wasn't a few years ago, is if you buy a new vehicle, do you pay sales tax on the rebates?
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes that can be a doozy. When you think about end of year, end of model year clearances, and there's $10,000 in rebates, you're going to pay the state of South Dakota 3% on that as well, plus your trade difference. Okay? So try to accommodate for some of that if you're in the new vehicle market, and there are some fairly significant rebates that you will pay to 3%. And then of course you'll pay the licensing fee for the year as well. They do have 30 days to get you this documentation by law, so you know, once you get that, typically it'll probably be pushing the end of the 30 days, but you'll get that information, then that's what you take to the treasurer's office to get it done. Let's see, the rest that's pretty self-explanatory. Any questions on the process at all? That's a pretty brief overview. I'm happy to get into a little bit more detail if I need to. Any other thoughts about the process where it might have been confusing for you once upon a time that you'd want some clarification on?
I think it's still a little confusing to some people about the fact that the plates stay with the vehicle
Yes.
if you're trading. And then of course if you're selling outright and stuff.
It's actually, the plates don't stay with the vehicle, the plates stay with the owner.
Yeah, stay with
Right.
the owner,
Right.
not the vehicle.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't used to, they used to stay with the vehicle, but now they switched it, so.
Was it July of '08, I
Yeah.
think is when they did that?
Yeah.
One of the things to consider though, there is if you're ever selling a vehicle private party, if you've got one of the newer South Dakota titles, you'll see a little piece on it that gets torn off on the bottom. So if I'm selling my vehicle to you, I actually have to go on to a website, get some documentation, fill that out, and turn that in to the county. It's like a class 1 misdemeanor or something if you don't turn that in to report the sale. So if you ever do a private party sale or something like that, make sure that gets done. Okay?
What if your title doesn't have it on it? Is it just the newer one?
Yeah, you can. The newer titles have been produced with a tear-off sheet at the bottom. I believe all the documentation is available at sdcars.org. Is where you can get all that information.
They want to make sure you register your vehicle after you buy it.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's an added step. And like it was kind of alluded to here a minute ago, the plates stay with the owner. So what do you do? You know, they gotta have something in their vehicle or it's gonna look like it's stolen. So that's actually where you get that other document that you have to print out as you're going through this process to hand to that new owner. Put this in your vehicle for the next 30 days until you get things registered. Okay? Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, let's jump into buying versus leasing. So what is leasing? Well, by definition, leasing finances the use of a vehicle. Okay? You only pay for what you use. Typically, these terms are anywhere from, I've seen them anywhere from 12 to 60 months. And that's pretty broad, but you can see them about anywhere in between there. The average, I would say, is probably closer to a 36-month term. For a while there, 39-month terms were very popular. I think that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, but typical term, 36 months. So can you lease a vehicle? Can you lease a used vehicle? You can. It might not necessarily be the most beneficial to do that. Once upon a time, probably, I don't know, 7-10 years ago, something like that, used vehicle leases were very popular, and they made sense for some people, and the vehicle, depended upon the vehicle and whatnot. Today, I'm guessing that still does exist a little bit, but probably not a whole lot. The credit union does not participate in the leasing program. We did once upon a time. Today, we do not. It's hard to tell. That might be something that comes back in the future. So like I'm saying here, that most of the time, when you say leasing, it's typically associated with a new vehicle. One of the big differences is the leasing company technically owns vehicles. So if you come back and you look at your title, it'll say, Ford Motor Credit, and then your name type of thing as the technical owners of the vehicle. Because remember, you're only paying for a portion of the vehicle. You have to turn it in at the end. Well, I'll give you a little bit more on leasing. So what basically leasing does is help someone get into a newer vehicle at a lower payment. Okay, so because again, you're only paying for the use of the vehicle. So the next thing, when you talk about stuff like that is, okay, if I'm going to lease a vehicle, how many miles do I drive a year? You're going to have restrictions to that. You can't put on 25,000 miles a year. You're going to get dinged for that in the end. So and we'll go through a little bit more about this stuff going forward as well. But the leasing part of it really does help people get into a newer vehicle at a lower cost. Is the brunt of that. So purchasing, how is purchasing any different? Okay, the buying your new vehicle finances the entire purchase of it. So what type of loan terms are out there? Well, really, it's anywhere from 12 to 84 months. That's probably a pretty good range of the different terms available. One thing to keep in mind there, while that 84-month loan payment might look attractive, keep in mind you might be paying a little bit higher rate because typically these things are priced according to the term. So the longer the term, the higher you have here is when you're a purchaser, you're really the sole owner of the vehicle. You don't have a leasing company on that title with you because you own the vehicle. Okay? So some benefits. There are some pretty good benefits to both sides of this. Leasing benefits, like I said before, able to get into that newer vehicle for a lesser payment. More than likely, you're going to stay covered under manufacturer's warranty, right? Because most manufacturer's coverages are going to range anywhere from 3 to 4 years and up to maybe 50, 60,000 miles. So you're going to be able to be covered under that manufacturer's warranty the entire time you have the vehicle. You also have the ability to transition to a new vehicle quicker because it's a shorter term. So what happens? If you lease a vehicle for 3 years, what happens at the end? Does anybody know? Has anybody leased a vehicle before? If I leased a vehicle today and 3 years pass, I've made all my payments, I have options. I can either buy the vehicle for what's called the residual value, which is the number that's on that contract I signed on day one. I'm guaranteed that number even 3 years from now. So I can buy that vehicle out and go on with my life after that, or I can turn it in and walk away from it. Then the catch to that is, if you choose to turn the vehicle in, you got to be within the mileage guidelines. So if you signed up for a 12,000 mile a year lease, over 3 years you can only have 36,000 miles on that vehicle when it's time to turn it in. If you're over those miles and you choose to turn it in, they will hit you at probably 10 to 20 cents per mile that you're over. They'll make you pay that before they'll let you turn it in. Okay? Let's see. So again, option to buy or turn in, you're basically cleared from any depreciation because, right, you've ended your ownership with the vehicle.
But you don't do leasing anymore though, right?
We don't.
It's too volatile.
It is a bit volatile. Actually, all the new car manufacturers stepped out of the leasing game for quite, 3 years, 2 years?
Well, it's because the used car market, I mean, it's at a residual value, it's at 15,000 and come back and it'll be worth 10.
Yep.
And then what do you do with the $5,000? You're screwed.
Yep, for a
And
while
no one's
there.
gonna buy it at 15.
Right, yeah, they were really taking it on some of those vehicles. Ford, for example, I can remember Ford doing this 2-year F-150 leases for $299 a month. Well, who wouldn't want to sign up for that? You know, that was a fairly heavily equipped truck for $299 a month, no money down up front, things like that. You pay your first payment, sales tax and license, and that's it, you're out the door. So that's, you know, and then they come back and find out, well, things have changed a little bit. The residual values are a little off from what these vehicles are going to bring, what's going to happen. Everybody pretty much exited the leasing game at that point in time.
Leasing now, they don't even, a lot of those you see advertised, they're not even 12,000 a year leases, they're 10.
10,000, yeah.
They're making,
And they're all coming in with $2,500 down or $1,000 down.
what you see on TV for what they're advertising for leasing is usually, it's fake.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those, they want $2,999 down, so you can lease it at $199 a month.
Yep. Just how are we going to get to the
Blah,
payment?
blah. Yep, that's what it's about.
Yep.
It's not price, it's payment.
Now, I think I said this here a second ago, but one of the things to consider with leasing is if you're ready to sign that lease agreement, before you take possession of it, you are required to pay your first payment, sales tax, and license. Okay? Different. You know, on a purchase, you don't do that. You pay your first payment 30 to 45 days from now. You pay your sales tax in 30 days. It's the opposite this way. You pay it up front. So what's the benefits of buying a vehicle then? Well, again, you have the full ownership of the vehicle. You've got no mileage restrictions, I guess, per se, unless you want to keep within your warranty and whatnot. Potential length of loan longer, which could result in lower payment. Well, obviously, you know, if you take out a 6-year loan on something, you're going to, the result of that is going to be a little cheaper payment, right? Anyone can own the vehicle with you, so it doesn't have to be Ford Motor Credit and this person because it's a leasing company. It can be me, my spouse, me, somebody else, whatever the case may be. At some point during this process, you're not going to have a payment because you're going to pay it off, right? So If you do keep your vehicle longer than a few years, and you get to that point, you may have it paid off. We see, on our side of it, we see the average term to be less than 3 years, almost closer to 2 years. So it's definitely, it's evolved a little bit the last few years, last 10 years probably, but typically we see things churning right around that 30 months. So what are the cons? Well, on the leasing side of it, you don't really have any ownership. You do, but you don't type of thing. You either turn it in or you end up buying it out. When you buy it out, that's when you have the full ownership. You're always going to have a payment. So even if you lease something for 3 years, turn around, you got to turn it in, you got to turn around and do something else with it, right? You either have to buy it out or you have to lease something else. So, you know, if you're not keeping your vehicles very long, this may not be a terrible option, just depending upon how things go. And again, another big con of that is the mileage restrictions. You also have condition restrictions in there. You can't run it into a pole and not fix it, okay? And then come into the dealership and look at turning it in. It doesn't work that way. They actually have a nice little chart that they will come out with. They'll walk around your vehicle, they'll measure the tire tread, they'll do all that. They'll look for, you know, little dings, little window things on the glass, things like that. And if it's over, it used to be like quarter size on some of it, then you're stuck replacing it or paying at that point in time to do that. Okay?
The other thing that we just had the other day with someone buying out their lease, they have to pay sales tax again.
Correct. Yes.
You only pay sales tax on a lease for the portion you
You
use.
do, yep. It's 3% of the payments is what you can calculate that at. Okay? That is very confusing. We have that an awful lot on our side of it, knowing that you didn't know that. So, what's the cons to buying? Well, your term could be limited due to the vehicle age. So the older the vehicle, like we talked about before, the older the vehicle, probably going to have shorter term. The newer the vehicle, your ability to have a longer term is definitely greater. And then you're subject to any depreciation. We learned this back in 2008, right? When we had gas prices hit $4 a gallon and you saw every single truck and SUV go like this in value. That was probably the best time to ever buy an SUV or a truck, was back in probably August of 2008, because the values have come down so significantly. So what do you think happened to those people that 6 months before that bought a brand new Suburban? They were probably in pretty rough shape if they would have tried to trade that thing in, you know, again, depending upon their equity and whatnot. So keeping that stuff in mind definitely ties into it. So that's really all I had on the leasing part of it. Any questions, anything you didn't know, anything you want to know more about?
Would it be good to have gap insurance on any car loan?
Yes. That's my short answer.
Yes.
Of course it is. You know, again, dependent upon how much you're borrowing. If the vehicle's worth $20,000, you're only borrowing $10,000, it's probably not a necessity. You can always have it, but it's probably not going to be a necessity.
Okay.
We actually have a really neat tool in place on our side of it that it's all web-based. We can kind of just flip our screens and show this to you, plug in the information about what we're financing, what the term of the loan is, and it gives us a nice little graph about, okay, where do we meet, where do we not meet, maybe when we would be more susceptible to having an issue with a gap versus not. So another way to put that is, what am I going to catch up? So it's just kind of a forecast. It's a really nice tool, actually, that we have that helps determine some of that. So if somebody is borderline on what they want to do, then we can always use that as a resource. Any other questions on anything with buying versus leasing? Okay, well, let's jump into student loans. I don't have a lot to tell you about student loans today other than some other options. Today, the credit union does not have an in-house student loan program in place. So what does that mean? You couldn't come in the door today and say, I need to borrow $20,000 to go to USF this fall. Okay, well, we can look at that option. It's not going to be in a traditional student lending format, though. I can tell you today that is something that has been in the works. It's nothing that's been necessarily ready to roll out. There's a lot of regulatory burden when it comes to student loans. I'm sure you've heard some of it in the news now. Well, that maybe doesn't all apply to us. There's a lot of other regulatory things happening there. So making sure everything is ready to go beforehand is very key. Federal loans might be available, so really my best advice would be if you've got somebody, son, daughter, cousin, whatever, somebody you know that's going into college for the first time or whatever their life is entailing, talk to the financial aid office. It might sound a little overwhelming, but they are a wealth of information. They're very, very good at what they do. So talk to those financial aid people. Okay, they can give you lots of clues on what to do and how to get the process started. One other thing is talk to them and ask them about what other scholarships or grants the school might know about. Something that is just not general knowledge. They might be able to point you in the direction of saying, well, I know of this scholarship, apply for it, or grant, something like that. But really use that financial aid office. They do a great job and they're a wealth of information.
Do you know if the financial aid offices will assist you with determining your qualifications for subsidized loans versus unsubsidized?
Yeah, I do believe that they are, they have some of that knowledge to be able to point in those directions.
The
FAFSA.
FAFSA is really super easy to fill out. I mean, it's not that hard. It's not, I don't think it's hard.
I think it depends on how much money wealth you have, your family and stuff.
I'm poor, so it's really easy to fill out.
Well, I know if you go to school, like, for instance, obviously traditional age, like 18 to 24, they still, no matter if your parents give you a cent or they give you a bunch of money for college, they determine that you are dependent on your parents. And once you go after 24, then you're like a non-trad and they only look at your income. So like when I went to school, they looked at my parents' income. They didn't look at what I was looking, so that's what they determine. And I think a lot of people need to know that before they go to college.
Yep, and they also have, the parents were a part of it at that point. The parents are on loan. They're the ones borrowing the money with you for the most part. Really?
Some of them.
Some programs, others not. Some of the private programs that you'd see elsewhere, they may have different requirements. One of the things that we found in our research is that more often than not, cosigners are required. So when you get past that in the non-traditional setting.
My experience was.
Yeah.
With my kids.
Yeah.
Well, my experience
They're not
with,
holding them.
sorry, besides the federal, obviously some of the federal loans, but like the private loans, like it's really good to have your parents co-sign because you lose a bunch of points in interest if you have your parents co-sign or some family member.
Yeah.
But like if you're taking it out by yourself, oh my gosh, the interest rate on them private loans.
Yeah, and it's a different. It's not backed by the government. These are not government insured loans. This is the credit union granting you this loan. This is a bank down the street granting you this loan. So it's there's risk that's posed there just like any other loan as well. So yes, you're right. Typically you will see that. You're going to see different options too on that private student loan market. You'll see fixed rate options and you'll see variable rate options. So, depending upon what fits your lifestyle a little bit better, it may be nice to have one over the other. It is a good idea, I guess my opinion is a good idea to go into it with a cosigner at any point in time, unless, you've got great credit and you're going to be working full time throughout the entire course of the school so you can support the repayment part of it. That's where a lot of the risk gets posed.
Because you cannot put those on a bankruptcy.
You cannot.
Obviously it's not the federal loans, but like what about the private student loans?
There's actually some
a little bit of leeway, or
no, there's actually some legislation that was introduced last May in Congress about how you should be able to discharge a private student loan in bankruptcy. It hasn't passed yet, but at this point it's my understanding that no student loans are dischargeable in bankruptcy.
And that's
They're
what my
probably
understanding
freaking
was
out
too,
about
but
it
I was kind of like
now anyway, because you read a lot of the new information about people who are graduating from college with liberal arts degrees, and they're servers and bartenders because they can't get a job in what they went to school for. And they have thousands and thousands of dollars in student loan debt that they can't pay off.
And that's where the repayment comes into play. That's where it's nice to have a little bit longer amortization schedule. You can run those payments out there a little bit so they aren't so painful.
Well, they just changed that. What used to be that your minimum payment was 15% of discretionary income, and now they're making it 10%.
Okay.
So that will make it a little less painful for some people. Because it's hard to do that if you are making $10 an hour after you graduate college.
And there's different tools that you can have there as well. The private market is just a whole different animal than the federal side of it. It really is. There's a lot of things that are a little bit different. Some good. I mean, they're not all negatives. We need student loans. You can only get so much from the federal, so you gotta have the ability. You either gotta have it saved up, or you gotta have the ability to pay for it in some way, shape, or form. So, because we don't today have a non-traditional student loan program in place, what other options do you have? Well, if private loans are not an option, what do? If you own a home, okay, well maybe you don't own anything on your home. Take out a mortgage on the home. Maybe you've got a little equity on your home. That gives some other benefits aside, you know, potentially be able to deduct the interest on your taxes, things like that. Personal loans, you know, we do personal loans. We can look at options like this. However, it isn't anything that's going to stay in deferment until you're done with school. That's something that you're going to start paying on right away. But they are options, and sometimes the difference between what the tuition is and maybe the federal aid that somebody has, or even the other private aid somebody has, just leaves a little bit left to pay. This is a good option then at that point. It's really not, you know, if you've got only a couple thousand to make up, let's look at something and get you into something, get it taken care of. If you've got a car title or any equity in your vehicle, look at using some of that equity, paying for it, that gap in the tuition, or however, you know, the process is going to go. So there's some roundabout ways of getting there. However, at this point in time, anytime, you know, we see somebody that's asking about student loans, we really encourage them to visit with their financial aid office to get that process started and rule that stuff out and make sure that they've maximized on the federal side, and then come on to the private student loan side of it. Any questions on student loans or anything like that? Or any of the other auto buying process or buying versus leasing? Nothing? Well, that's all I had for you. I hope you can walk away with a little something. If there's any questions or anything, let me know.